We're back looking into the issue of euthanasia and assisted suicide. Dr. Jose Pereira is a leading authority on palliative care. He's spent years helping people die well. He's worked in countries that allowed physician-assisted suicide and warns Canadians that the practice is a slippery slope. Take a look.
If you look at the data across in those countries, in those jurisdictions that do allow assisted suicide and euthanasia, the data seems to indicate that there's been no dramatic increase in the number of cases of persons asking for assisted suicide or euthanasia and receiving it. And on the basis of that, they say there's no slippery slope. But let me share with you some experiences that I had in Switzerland. So Switzerland has got 26 cantons, the equivalent of our provinces. And in those 26 cantons, there are only a small handful of them where there are actual palliative care services in place. The rest, there's no formal palliative care services, at least not supported by the cantonal health ministries. And so, despite a large debate about assisted suicide, etc., they haven't put in place access to palliative care across all the jurisdictions. In Geneva itself, at the very time that the Hospital of Geneva, the large teaching academic hospital, opened up its doors to assisted suicide, they shut down the community-based palliative care service.
Joining me now from the Canadian Catholic Bioethics Institute is Dr. Moira McQueen. Moira, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Lorna.
You are on record saying that the euthanasia debate in Canada right now is scary. Why?
Well, when I used that term, it was in the context of the poll that was done in Quebec. And the thing that I found most scary at that point was the fact that this was a poll done by physicians for physicians. And I really thought, well, if that's the overall response of physicians in this country, then that certainly looks problematic for those of us who are completely against euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide.
Why should we not give in to that temptation to just assist someone's comfort and hurry on the end of their life?
Well, you know, to assist someone's comfort is something that every one of us is in favour of, no matter where we stand politically on this issue. And that's completely different from this idea of topping up to cause death. But the distinction there between easing pain, because nobody should suffer if it's possible to relieve that pain, even to the point of unconsciousness. This is actually Catholic teaching too. It's very fascinating and very pastoral, that as long as the intention is to relieve pain, it's morally acceptable. But as soon as we get to the stage of saying just one little bit more and, you know, mum will go over the top, if you like, to actually start causing death is something that's completely different. I don't really see why people feel the need to do that when there is good pain medication anyway. And so
they don't want people to suffer. They don't want their loved one to suffer. So why,
yeah, but
why not then? What is the moral argument? Because you said this isn't a medical issue, it's a moral argument.
Yeah, I really do believe it is a moral argument. It's one of those areas where every single one of us has to make up our minds about how we're going to handle this. And I think the distinction is pretty clear, that nobody wants them to suffer, so I have complete sympathy with people who are talking from that point of view. But the distinction again is whether or not you say to people that it's okay to go ahead and give that extra bit which will actually cause my mother to die. The whole point is good pain medication so that people die without pain but still die naturally. In other words, we're not having the intention to cause death, but we do have the intention to relieve pain.
Why is there an argument that when to die should be left to the natural steps with God in charge?
The whole idea of anybody who really values life and the sanctity of life is that life is to be protected from conception until natural death. This is the life cycle given to us by God. We do everything within that cycle to make sure people are well, as happy as possible, that kind of thing. We either do a good job or we don't, but we do feel very strongly that that life is not ours to take. And that's why I call it a moral issue too. It's not a medical issue. It goes to the deepest heart of who we are as people.
And Canadians have polled that they don't agree with that life is not ours to take.
Right.
there is that leading edge. It's close in culture, but it still leads that Canadians feel we should be able to decide when we want to end our own life.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it reflects how we are as a society about so many moral issues, not just euthanasia. The whole question of choice is something that has really crept into our culture and is enshrined in law, and so any movements, even in the euthanasia field, are moving towards being legalized. We talk about all these issues as if we're talking about rights, whereas I think there's another way of talking about them, and I think I would be talking about them from the point of view of we're really talking about human needs, who we really are as people. How I die isn't about a right, it's about the best death that can happen to me, surrounded by friends, family, looked after. In other words, my death as my birth will be relational. And I think we don't do ourselves any favours actually when we somehow narrow the focus about something as important as life and death and call it rights, as if rights are the only thing that it's about. I think in terms of who we are as people, it goes much more deeply than that.
All right. Moira McQueen, thank you very much for being with Listen Up.
Thank you. Thank you.
And when we come back, we'll hear from a man who says when death comes down to economics, it would be cheaper to kill him than to keep him. That dimension of euthanasia, next.